Good evening and welcome to the Hudson Library and Historical Society's live event with Tony Oppedisano, author of Sinatra and Me in the Wee Small Hours. Before we get started, I want to let you know that we have one more author program this month. Kate White will discuss her book, The Fiancé, on Wednesday, June 30th at 7 p.m. And don't forget, we have morning yoga, Tai Chi, and meditation classes coming up outside on the library patio. You can learn about and register for all of our programs on hudsonlibrary.org. A reminder that if you're joining us on Zoom, you can put any questions you might have in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, or if you're watching on Facebook, you can put your questions in the chat. Also, the Learned Owl, our independent bookstore, is selling copies of tonight's book, and there's a link in the chat if you'd like to purchase one. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome author Tony Oppedisano, a former professional musician and singer who went on to become an award-winning producer and personal manager to entertainment icons Frank Sinatra and Don Rickles. He became a very close friend and confidant to Sinatra, and their intimate conversations are the stuff of this book. Sinatra and Me in the Wee Small Hours has been called one of the very best of the Sinatra books. Dina Martin, actress and daughter of Dean Martin, states, Oppedisano captures not just Frank, but Frank's entire world, and you're in for an authentic treat. Tony will be in conversation with Paul Ferguson, Director of Jazz Studies at Case Western Reserve University. As a trombonist, he has toured with the Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey orchestras and currently performs with the Cleveland Jazz Orchestra, the Canton Symphony, and the High Anxiety Bones. Please give a warm virtual welcome to Tony Oppedisano and Paul Ferguson. All yours, guys.
Okay. Well, Tony,
thank you.
To some of I'll kind of start just to get things going, but the circumstances of you meeting Frank and becoming part of his inner circle are kind of amazing, because I'm trying to think. You were born, I think, 1952, which is 37 years after Frank. Is that about right? 52 or so, or?
Yeah, we were 36. I was 36 years his junior. Yeah.
Yeah. So you hang out at a club where Frank frequented, and all of a sudden Frank takes a liking to you, and the rest just goes on from there. It's amazing.
The way it actually came down is I was already a fan at age 12, 13 years old of Frank's. And he recorded one of the best, in my opinion, one of the best live albums to this day, called Sinatra at the Sands, released in 1965. And he kept talking about Jillies and Jillies and Jillies. And I'm thinking, okay, well, when I get old enough to start playing clubs, I got to check this place out. So I did. I befriended Jilly's older brother, Uncle Frank, who ran the club in Jilly's absence when he was on the road with Frank Sinatra. And we hit it off. He said, you're always in a tuxedo when you come in here. What do you do? I said, well, I'm a jazz musician and I'm a singer. And he says, well, if you get through early tonight, why don't you come back and sit in with the guys? I'd love to hear you. And I did. And he said, oh, I got to introduce you to my brother. So a couple of months later, when Jilly came back off the road, he introduced us. We hit it off. I tell that story in the book, so I don't want to spoil it. It was an interesting evening. I started to be a regular at the place. And within about 8 months, Jilly said to me one day, he said, you know, the old man is going to be coming into town. He was in his self-imposed retirement at that point, where he walked away from the industry. He wanted to spend more time with friends and family. And he told me in later years that he also was not quite sure that he was relevant to my generation, and he wanted to take a breather and figure all that out. So Jilly introduced us on December 8, 1972. After we came back from seeing Frank Jr. at the Rainbow Room, we went back over to the club on 57th Street, and he scared the heck out of me because I wasn't prepared to think he would. I had a gig earlier that evening, so I was in a tuxedo and I had my guitar in the car. And he said, listen, I'm going to close the club right at 4 o'clock. He says, why don't you go get your guitar and come in? I want him to hear you. And I was thinking, I wonder why I shouldn't have had so much Jack Daniels already tonight. I'm going to make a complete fool of myself. But it didn't go that way. It went extremely well. and we were there till about 6:30 or so in the morning, and it was a terrific evening. We clicked musically, and then he kept asking, whenever he came into town, see what the kids doing. I used to come into the club, and then shortly thereafter, in the fall of '73, he was convinced that he was relevant. He recorded "Old Blue Eyes Is Back," came out of retirement, and the merry-go-round started going all over again. So that's how we.
That's really beautiful. Didn't you play on guitar "How Insensitive," something for him?
Yeah, the keyboard player that night, Joe Patrone, wonderful musician. We did about 6 tunes. As typical of the club, you call a tune, you call a key, count a tempo, and you're off to. And about 5 or 6 tunes into this, Joe said to me, "Hey Tony, why don't you do something by yourself, a la Joe Pass or Bucky Pizzarelli?" And I'm thinking, okay, what tune? And then it dawned on me that I knew Frank had a soft spot for some of the Jobim stuff that he had recorded only a couple of years earlier.
Right.
And so I started to play "How Insensitive," and about 12 bars into it, all of a sudden, across from me on the piano, Frank starts humming, which almost caused me to drop the guitar. And then he goes from humming to singing. Now I'm accompanying him, and we ran through the tune and played it out, and it was as though we had rehearsed it.
Yeah.
And he opened his eyes and he looks across the piano at me and he says, "That was really nice, kid. That was really nice." And I said to him, I said, "Thank you, Mr. Sinatra." I said, "I'm no Al Viola, but I try." And he looked at Julie and he says, "Who the hell is this kid? How does he know who Al Viola is?" And as you know, Al Viola was his longtime guitarist.
Right. So, that record he made with Jobim is just classic. And I think they re-released that on CD with some extra alternate takes or something several years ago.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful. And one of the songs he sings on there is "Song of the Sabia," extremely complex song. And for Frank to learn that's like 72 measure song or something like that. I tried it, and it's like, boy, that's really something.
Believe it or not, he released that as a single on a 45. It was a B-side. Yeah,
wow.
It was a B-side tune that he did. Yeah.
Oh, that's just. Jobim and Sinatra. That's just.
Oh.
Well, a lot of people don't. A lot of people know some of the big albums, "In the Wee Small Hours," "Only the Lonely," but the one with Jobim doesn't really get lost. But that's 2 giants there. That's kind of. I almost get goosebumps even thinking about it right now. So, and Jobim, and it was great as well.
It was great that he also had him on one of his Man and His Music specials. To see the two of them live sitting in chairs opposite each other doing that stuff is just priceless.
Oh, my. Now, Kathy, are there going to be musical examples interspersed in this? I just want to make sure we don't break the momentum at the right time, or how's that going to be?
No, it's all you, just the 2 of you. So.
Okay, I thought you mentioned something about some musical examples or something. But that's fine. We got plenty to talk about. So.
Well, I can hum if it'll make you feel better.
Now, Tony, one thing. Did you ever mention in the book? I'm not sure I caught this. Is there a particular Sinatra album that's your favorite? The 2 of them that I just mentioned are a lot of everyone's favorites, but maybe you have a little different opinion.
It was also a favorite of his, and as a matter of fact, when I tell you the title, his line was, the album I'm thinking about is "Only the Lonely."
Right.
Gorgeous Nelson Riddle, gorgeous arrangements. And Frank used to listen to that, and he used to say, that album should be available by prescription only.
That's fabulous.
He says, when you listen to that, he said, it's tantamount to taking your problems and hanging them on a clothesline next to everyone else's. And sure as hell, you're going to pick your own back for sure.
I often wonder, like, what was it like to be, I mean, at least as I understand, I'm open to correction, Frank was good buddies with Jimmy Van Heusen.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, so, I mean, Van Heusen was kind of a man's man, like during World War II, he's flying fighter jets, and then he gets done and starts writing tunes. What a guy.
and you know, the fight, his real name is Edward Chester Babcock.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
His real name. And they were driving to New York, and they saw a sign, a billboard for Van Heusen shirts, and Frank said, "That's a good name." Yeah, they were characters. I never got to know Jimmy, unfortunately. I got to know Sammy Kahn,
Right.
but I got to know Jimmy's wife, Bobby. She was a sweetheart, and she told me that he and Frank had a running gag where when Frank wanted to have him come over when it was cocktail hour, Frank would set up ice and some stuff in a blender, and he would dial Jimmy's number, and as soon as Jimmy said hello, Frank would push the button on the blender, put the phone, and then hang up. And 10 minutes later, Jimmy was at the door.
Well, I mean, one thing that amazes me, this is not all about Frank, but it's also about how Frank would inspire people, is, I mean, Jimmy had to write songs for Frank. And the songs that Jimmy wrote for Frank are Come Fly With Me, Only the Lonely, All the Way, and probably several others, maybe All My Tomorrows. I'm not sure which songs Jimmy wrote for Broadway shows or whatnot. But I mean,
yeah.
to me, just to think that, okay, I need to write a ballad for Frank, and you come up with something like Only the Lonely, which is a titanic piece of work. Talk about digging deep. That is just astonishing. I mean, I can just wonder what it was like. Can you imagine Frank and Jimmy the first time they get together and Jimmy's playing the piano and maybe Sammy Kahn's hanging around and Frank's like, you you just wonder what was going on.
They were a great fit. As a matter of fact, the first film that Frank had them score, they hadn't done a movie before. And the studio they were pushing back, and Frank said, "That's who I want, or you're going to have a problem with me too." And he, like he always did, once he planted a flag for somebody, he was determined to make it go through, or else. Yeah. And Sammy Kahn, I got to know Sammy Kahn in the late 80s. Jilly and I were handling some talent, and we went over to Sammy's house on Crescent Drive in Beverly Hills, and he was quite a character, and his wife Tita, quite a character. We pulled into the courtyard, and under the portico, his car was parked next to hers, and they had personalized plates, and on his car it said earns, and her car said spends. And and so anyway, so I'm talking to Sammy about, some of the great tunes he wrote and everything else. And I said, but let me ask you a personal question. I said, given who you are in the industry, I said, I'm sure that you must get submissions from people from all over the country. He says, oh, please, Tony, I get bags and bags of that stuff. And I said, well, let me ask you, I said, is any of that stuff, is it any of it any good? And he said, knowing that it's going to end up in my garbage pail in front of my house, he said, most of the stuff is so bad, I have to rewrite it before I throw it away.
That reminds me of a joke someone said. This jazz pianist is playing a really bad piano. It says, this piano needs to be tuned, then burned. So, same sort of thing. So.
Yeah, well, I had an occasion early on at a club I was playing in Brooklyn. As a quick aside, you talk about pianos, and I was running through some stuff. I was working with a quintet that night, and the piano was questionable.
Right.
And so it was one of those joints that was owned by some Italian businessmen, shall I say. And so I went over to the captain and I said, listen, I'll change the name. I said, is Vinny in yet? Why? What's going on? I said, well, I need to talk to him. And he said, well, is somebody bothering you? I said, no, nobody's bothering me. I just need to talk. Okay. So he comes over about 15 minutes later. He says, Vinny, come on. Vinny is here. I'll bring you in the office. I go in the office. He comes around, gives me a big hug. And I said, listen, Vinny, I need to talk to you about something. Somebody bothering you? No, nobody's bothering me, Vinny. I need to talk to you about the piano. And he says, what about it? I said, well, quite honestly, Vinny, I said, it needs a little work. And he looked at me with a straight face, Paul, and he said, what are you kidding? I just had the thing painted.
That's great.
Where do you go from there?
That's fabulous. So, sometimes one thing you meant, one chapter of the book is devoted to Sinatra's women. Okay, so talk about Ava Gardner. Some really interesting stuff. She was one of the guys as far as how she could speak in some ways.
Yeah.
I got to work once with Sarah Vaughan, Sarah the Sailor. I got a little taste of that too.
She was great.
Yeah, nothing like being with women who could talk with anybody.
Yeah. No, Frank said, that part of the reason we didn't last. She said she was too much like me. She said she could drink. She could drink me under the table, and her language could grow hair on the wall.
But some people have drawn a connection between Only the Lonely and Ava Gardner. Did Frank ever mention that, or is that something the critics just made up?
The tune that he actually had a hand in writing when he was at his most tortured point with her, he called Nelson Riddle, who wrote the chart, and he said, Nelson, please do me a favor, make sure that the guys have run the chart to the point where they really know it in their sleep. He said, because when I come into the studio, I'm not sure if I got more than one take in me. He said, because the tune just takes too much out of me. He went in, he did it in one take, and that's what we listen to this very day. And the song is I'm a Fool to Want You.
All right. Okay. Wow. That's
yeah,
something.
Think about that tortured lyric. Pity me, I need you.
Right. That's operatic. That's Pagliacci for pop singers.
There you go. There you go.
That's amazing. So, hey, Kathy, we're doing great here, but maybe somebody else has a question. We're 1/3 of the way in. I just want to make sure we don't. We can break it up things here a little bit if you like.
Okay. Well, there are some patron questions coming up. One of them is, what was the most surprising story about Frank Sinatra?
Boy, that's like going into
wait,
a buffet.
I'm sorry. The question is, it's split in two parts. I didn't see the end. What was the most surprising story Frank Sinatra ever told you?
That's a very unique question. There are quite a few. I mean, one of the ones was about the whole situation with Tommy Dorsey, where when he wanted to leave Tommy, and they put him under such a huge, very usurious contract to the point where between what he was paying Tommy and what he was paying Tommy's lawyer for drawing it up, and then he was paying his new management, and he was paying his agent, and he was in arrears with the IRS. He was living on 7 cents on a dollar, believe it or not. And the romanticized version, which is even told in The Godfather, the movie The Godfather, with Johnny Fontaine character played by Al Martino, about mob guys going in to see Tommy and basically putting a gun to his head and say, okay, here's the contract releasing Frank. Either your brains or your signature is going to be on the paper. And when Frank told me the true story about what happened behind that, it was just shocking. It was a straight ahead business deal, thanks to Lou Wasserman, who, as you know, was the head of, he started MCA, and Manny Sachs, who at the time was handling Frank off the record for no money. And they put a deal together and got him out of his contract by signing him to a new record company. They got an advance. They talked to the studio that he was under contract to. and got a clause put in his contract that he could do an outside film, one a year, and they booked two, and they got an advance on both of those. And they basically paid, doing the calculations from then till now, they basically paid Tommy Dorsey close to $750,000 in cash to let Frank out of his deal. And, and at that point, the big bands were waning. They weren't getting the kind of work. So Tommy grabbed it and ran for the hills. And, and I even said to Frank, I said, how come you never corrected the romanticized version? He said, people seem to like the other version better. He says, and I learned the hard way that I had to pick my battles with the press. He says, I could just picture myself trying to tell the story I just told you to a reporter. And he'd say, yeah, nice try, Frank. Nice try. So there's one for you.
Someone else is asking, are you in touch with Frank's daughters?
On occasion, I stay more in touch with his granddaughters, AJ and Amanda. AJ is actually doing pretty well as a vocalist in her own right, and she works around. She works up in San Francisco, here in clubs here in LA. She's done a few gigs in New York, and Amanda is doing very well for herself. She's got a young daughter, but she's a really terrific artist. She had a showing down in the desert shortly after Frank passed away, and I went with Nancy Sr. So, yeah, that's pretty much who I'm in touch with in the family. I was in touch with Frank Jr. Until he unfortunately left us far too early.
I was really fortunate to play one of Frank Jr.'s last gigs. It was in Akron, Ohio.
Really?
Yeah, it was about 5 months before he died, maybe 6. I believe it was October of 2015. And I even took a picture of some of the music because I played trombone. And I took a picture of the lead trumpet part on The Way You Look Tonight. And it said Frank Sinatra. I mean, with this old part that had been played by who knows how many people for maybe, 40 years or so. And really a great bit of history for me. And boy, Frank Jr. looked good. He did not look at all like a man who was candidate for a heart attack. He looked slim. What a shame.
He did. He had come off a couple of other ailments, though. He had back surgery. He had a couple other things going on, but he was determined to get back out there. And all I can say is that if there is an upside to when and how he went, he was in the middle of a very successful tour. He literally was walking on his way to a rehearsal when he had the heart attack, and who knows, he quite possibly never even know what hit him. But I know at least psychologically he was in a really good place.
That's good. Another nice thing about that gig for me was that I got to play with maybe 3 or 4 guys who had played with Frank Sinatra Sr. Maybe Walt Johnson on trumpet, and some other guys, a couple saxophone players maybe, and it was just like, wow. Was Bob Kamel playing drums? I forget. But anyway, it was just like a little bit of history for me, and that was.
Did you, being a trombone player, did you ever meet Larry O'Brien? Well, Larry O'Brien was Junior's conductor for a long time, and he was trombone player.
Yeah, Larry was conductor of the Glenn Miller Orchestra for a long time, and but when I played for the Glenn Miller band, it was a guy named Dick Gerhardt. Larry did it for a while in the early '80s, and then maybe back again in the '90s, 2000s. But a highly regarded guy. I wish I'd gotten to know him, and sounds like a good fit. So, but anyway, I'll just never forget that. Just thinking how good Frank Jr. looked, and what a shock it was to.
And he sounded a lot like his dad. I mean, it was organic.
Well, organic. That particular gig, I mean, this is kind of not germane to our discussion, but that gig was fabulous in certain ways, but also disappointing in certain ways, because it was fabulous musically. We're up there playing this classic stuff, having so much fun, but then out in the audience, it was for Summa Health. Summa Health is like the main provider in Summit County, where Akron is. And it was a bunch of
Mhm.
doctors out there chatting and eating hors d'oeuvres and networking while Frank Sinatra Jr. is up there singing his behind off. You know? One of those.
Well, you know what's really funny? I'll tell you a quick aside. The night that I was discussing, December 8th, 1972,
Yeah.
Larry O'Brien was conducting. This is at the Rainbow Room in
That's
New York,
right.
top of Rock. And Frank was doing tunes a little bit off the beaten path, Horse with No Name and tunes like that.
Right.
And about 20 minutes into the show, the orchestra starts playing the introduction to one of his dad's songs. Now, here's his dad sitting off just out of the spillover of the lights from the stage, off in the dark in the corner with
Right.
Jilly.
Uh-huh.
And the audience, as soon as they heard the first few bars, they started applauding wildly. And Frank Jr. said, he says, you have no idea how happy I am, he said, that you reacted that way, because, you're closer to Frank Sinatra right now than you think. And I looked over at Senior, and he was shooting him a look with those blue laser eyes that he had. Thankfully, Frank Jr. came up with a line right on his feet, and he looked at the audience as the applause was dying down. He says, "No, it's not what you think." He says, "This is Dad's tuxedo. I borrowed it for the show."
That's fascinating.
He saved himself.
Oh, that's fabulous stuff. Were you with Frank when he learned new material? And the reason I ask that is because Frank is, best I can tell, one of the great instinctual musicians of the 20th century, along with, say, Luciano Pavarotti. Okay, Pavarotti he learned tunes by hearing them instinctually and added his own personality, interpretation, his own touch.
Mhm.
And what this enabled Frank to do was, like in the late 1940s, he conducted a record of music of Alec Wilder. I mean,
Yes.
how do you do this unless you're like a kind of a, I'll say a traditional schooled musician, But
Yeah.
Frank did it sort of instinctually, and it comes out wonderfully. And so I just
Yeah.
wonder if you witnessed Frank learning new material, because by night, when Frank recorded "He Shot Me Down," he learned two new Alec Wilder tunes for that occasion.
Mhm.
The best things on that record, I think, are really wonderful. And so, did
Yeah,
you
well,
Frank learning and stuff?
He was a natural. I like something else that we shared. I never took any music lessons whatsoever. Yet, sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, but I play 6 instruments.
Yeah.
He was natural. And though as I told you, that I shared a house with Bill Miller for a few years in the 80s, and Bill and we actually met in '74 when he was in New York. Frank did a gig at what was then the Uris Theater, right off of Broadway. Now it's called the Gershwin, and he was there with the Basie Band and Ella Fitzgerald for a couple of weeks. So I met Bill and Al Viola at Jilly's after the gig. They would come over there and hang out. At any rate, I shared a house with Bill, and he used to sit down with Frank and teach him new material. And then Frank had a process. He would learn a new tune, he would bring it on the road and work it. He would try different phrasing, he would try musicality wise, he would try singing different intervals as opposed to what was written, and he would listen to see what got the best reaction from the audience. And when he thought he had it the very best polish he could give it, that's when he went into the studio and recorded it that way. That was his process.
Wow.
And that's why it's ironic, because the only album that he really didn't get a chance to do that was Old Blue Eyes Is Back, because he was retired, quote unquote, when he went into the studio to do that.
Uh-huh.
And as luck would have it, when he came out of retirement and started doing those tunes, some of the tunes he literally had them rewrite the chart a step or two lower, so that because all of a sudden he was playing with the melody and knew that it would have a better impact if he went for a higher note as opposed to what was written.
Right.
And so there he was playing with the material, but it was the only one that he hadn't used his process on. So instead, he just changed it while he was on the road so that he could get the very best out of the song that he felt he could give.
Wow. So he might put it in a lower key, so maybe he'd be able to reach a higher climax at the end or something.
Yeah. In other words, I don't want to bore the audience, but instead of hitting an octave, he would maybe go for a third above the octave.
Right. Okay.
Harmonically, it would work, but it made more of an impression that he went for a higher note.
Right. Wow. That's, just to kind of finish up Alec Wilder a little bit. Did he ever? Alec Wilder died in 1980, and I think Frank recorded 2 of Alec Wilder's tunes on "She Shot Me Down." One's called "A Long Night," and the other, escaping me right now. But "A Long Night" sounds like it's a saloon song that's about a half a notch below Angel Eyes, maybe, or something like that. It just bad timing. It would be better known. But I just wondering about that process of that. That's "She Shot Me Down" is a record that is under a lot of people's radar, but that's really fabulous stuff.
Well, he did actually. If what I was told is correct, Nancy Jr. is the one who implored him to do that song.
Is that right? That's beautiful.
Yeah, she wanted him to do it.
Huh.
And so that, okay, well, it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I'll give it a shot. And you see the result.
"Long Night" sounds right in his wheelhouse. Long night. It's a long. It sounds a perfect saloon song.
Absolutely.
And
well, again, part of what his criteria was when he chose material was that he said, obviously the melody has to impress me. He said, but more importantly, he said, I take a look at the lyric and I ignore the music and I look at the lyric as though it were a script to a play.
Wow.
And he said, if it moves me, then it also gives me ammunition. He said, because then I can approach it like an actor. And as I'm singing the lyric, I can draw on my own personal experiences to add some depth and deeper meaning to the lyric, and it comes across in my singing. So that
raises a whole nother question. I mean, you could argue if you wanted that it's really hard to discern whether it's Frank's voice, the tone, or his approach to lyrics, which was more effective. I mean, you could just have fun with that, I think, for a long time. But which makes me wonder what you were mentioning as a play. Was Frank ever approached about doing any straight theater on Broadway? Like for could he have done Willie Loman on Death of a Salesman?
That was one of his regrets.
Yeah.
He always envisioned himself doing a Broadway show, but back in those days, they weren't doing what they're doing these days, where they will bring in a team like that, and it will be built in that it's a short run.
Right.
Back then, if you signed to do a show, you had to sign on for a couple of years,
right?
And he just couldn't bring himself to do that as much as he wanted to.
Right. That's one of if you could see Frank Sinatra doing Willie Loman on Death of a Salesman, that would have really been something, wouldn't it? I think he could have done it.
Absolutely.
Oh God. Absolutely. What if Arthur Miller had written a play for Frank Sinatra? I mean, he won an Oscar. Why not? I mean, he's good enough. So.
Yep. Yep.
So. Well, any other questions from the audience? We're at 7:35 now.
Oh, there are quite a few questions coming in.
Okay.
A couple people have asked about, Tony, all the records on your wall. So can you tell us about those?
Well, I'll start with the photograph. That photograph I took at Caesar's Palace in the 80s. That's one of my favorite shots of him. The records over here, and I'm doing it for a reason. This one right here was a project. Charles Koppelman's son-in-law, David Fritz, approached me with an idea, a concept of putting together a compilation album of some of the great music from some of the great mob movies. And so it was called Mob Hits. I was a music consultant on it. We did Mob Hits 1, Mob Hits 2, and Mob Hits Christmas. And I brought in people like Jerry Vale and Al Martino, Lou Monte, and that's what this record is for. The one next to it is something that I got from Capitol Records with regard to duets. I had a couple of private conversations with Frank, and he was apprehensive about certain things, and being sensitive as a singer myself, I kind of sensed what might have been bothering him, and I think I'd like to have be able to say that I had a little hand in convincing him what he was afraid of was nothing to worry about. And so I ended up with that. But the biggest thing, that record there in between the photograph, in the book I described that Frank asked me to do him a favor. One night we were sitting out by the pool at the compound in Palm Springs. It was around 4 a.m. and he said, listen, I'd like to talk to you about something about, I need you to do me a favor. And I said, sure. And he said, I'll meet you in the theater. So he had a private theater on his property, and we went in and I sat down. He came out a few minutes later with a valise, and he put the valise down on the table and he said, listen, the contents of what's in this bag are things that I've been putting aside since the 30s, and everything in there predates my relationship with Barbara. I said, okay. He said, so consequently, everything in there belongs at the right time to my family, to my blood, my children, my grandchildren, and even some of the stuff in there should go back to Mrs. Nancy. And he said, and I'm entrusting it to you. You'll know when the time is right to do that for me. And I said, absolutely, consider it done. And he then took the items out one by one and was describing what it was, how it came to be, and all of that stuff. And shortly thereafter, he said, you know, I've come to think of you as part of my extended family over the past few years. And he said, and I want to prove it to you. I said, Frank, there's, you don't have to prove, no, please allow me. And that's when he took out a little jewelry box and he pushed it across the table and he says, I want you to have this. And I opened it up, and it was his pinky ring with the family crest on it. And I'm looking at it, and he said, I want you to know something. He said, that one is the one that I used to wear on my left hand all those years. He said, and then when I married Barbara, he said, I put a wedding band on my left hand. He said, but that ring wouldn't fit over my calcified pinky on my right hand. His right hand was a bit like that because he injured it doing Manchurian Candidate, and it never re-healed the right way. So he had a replica of that ring made to fit over his pinky on his right hand in the late 70s. And he put the other one away. He said, so that's the original. It was a very emotional thing for me and for him to do. So anyway, consequently, a couple of weeks later, when I finally got back to my condominium in Toluca Lake, there was a package waiting for me. And I'm very proud and honored to say that Frank actually was a bit of a fan of me as a vocalist as well. And we would discuss the art of singing. It would bore people to death. At any rate, so he knew that I lamented having given up my performing career, that I would never earn a gold record as a vocalist. I could earn one as a producer, but not as a vocalist. And so to further thank me, like he needed to, open the package, and there is a note in there, and it says, this is for you, Tony, there's no discussion. And I open it up, and not only is it one of his gold records, it's his gold record of My Way.
Ah, wow.
Yeah. And so when I regained my composure, I called the house down in the desert. It was around 3 p.m. He was just getting up for his breakfast. And I called and I spoke to Vine, his gal, Friday, and I said, we had this euphemism we used to jokingly say. I said, Vine, is the gorilla up? She said, yeah, he just got up. He's having his breakfast. Why? I said, please tell him I'm on the phone. I'd like to speak with him. So she pulls the phone away from her ear and she said, Mr. S, Tonio's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. And I hear Frank chuckle, and I'm cleaning up the language. I hear him chuckle, and then he says to her, tell Tony to read the damn note again. And he wouldn't talk to me. So that's what that record is.
That's
Frank's
beautiful.
gold record of mine.
On My Way. Unbelievable.
My Way.
So,
Yeah.
is that, now, I'd like to talk, one of my favorite books about Frank is the one written by Will Friedwald, where he talks really about the music. It's called The Song Is You, Sinatra. And, did Frank ever just, offhanded, whatever, just mention what he liked best about each arranger who he worked with? I mean, he worked with some of the very best. Nelson Riddle, we all know about. Billy May,
Nelson
maybe
Riddle.
best known after that. But others like Don Costa. People know about Quincy Jones. A lot of the Quincy Jones arrangements were actually done by Billy Byers, who you may have met.
Billy Byers. Gordon Jenkins.
Gordon Jenkins. Alex Norris, maybe, going back a few years. Axel Stordahl.
Axel Stordahl.
But did Frank talk about them in a just offhand way or anything like that? Or?
Well, he each one of them had their own unique sound.
Yeah.
And that's why he would we forgot Neil Hefti as well.
Right.
Neil Hefti. And he would basically choose the arranger and the conductor based on the type of material that was going to be in the album. He did an album, a lot of the Only the Lonely album. He wanted that to be Puccini-esque. He wanted the charts to be Puccini-esque.
Wow.
Where the melody was repeated in the horn section in unison with his vocal.
Okay.
And he may not have been a schooled musician, but he knew what he wanted to hear, and he knew how to communicate.
Instinct
really
matter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I got to know Billy Byers a little bit years ago, and he called Don Costa the Puccini of pop. Interesting nickname. I never thought, okay. A great way to describe him, though. And he did the arrangement on New York, New York?
New York. Yeah, My Way.
Oh, my God.
Costa was the guy that helped bridge the gap in Frank's mind to bring him up to as close as what was happening in today's music.
Right.
So all of the newer things, maybe this time, and all of the newer things that Frank newer at the time that Frank recorded, he something. Nelson wrote a chart on something, but Frank preferred the one that Costa wrote.
Okay. When did Costa enter the picture, I guess I would say? With Nelson, early 50s through...
The first album, if memory serves, was Sinatra and Strings. And I think that was somewhere around 1963 or 4.
Okay.
And he was still using Nelson and Gordon Jenkins and Billy May. Yeah. But, the album that he did in 1980, he used 3 different arrangements. He had Billy May, and he had Gordon Jenkins, and Costa got halfway through the album, but that's when Costa passed away. So
the trilogy record?
The trilogy album, yeah, 1980. Right. Yeah,
pretty tight.
Actually, that, if memory serves, that was actually the last album he did on Reprise Records. Okay. Because the next album he did, "L.A. Is My Lady," he did with Quincy in like 1984, and that was on Q. That was on Quincy's label.
Right.
And duets, he was back at Capitol. So I think Trilogy was the last album that he did. Unless She Shot Me Down might have been after it, but it was the last major thing he did, because it was a 3-album disc, as you know.
Right.
Yeah. It was called the past, the present, and the future.
Right, right. That's beautiful stuff. Did he ever like talk anecdotally about any of those guys, or just because?
Well, you know, he was good friends with all of them, and
Okay.
like I say, they all had unique personalities. I got to know Billy May relatively well because when I was sharing the house with Bill Miller, he'd come over on a relatively frequent basis.
Yeah.
I unfortunately never got to know Nelson. I met Costa once or twice, but you know, they all had their own personality, and it came out in their music. You know,
Right.
Billy May had a great sense of humor, and that's where he came up with that bop ba da bop bop. Remember, he had the band sing that at the end of a couple of
Right.
tunes.
Okay. Billy May did most of the "Come Fly With Me" record, I think, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful stuff, and so it must have been fun hanging out with Billy too, because he.
Well, you know what was funny is that he was supposed to write a chart, Billy May, on "Don't Worry About Me,"
Oh, okay.
and
Bob.
something came up. Oh, absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And something came up, and he was taken away, but they had the recording session already set, and so they talked Nelson into writing the chart, and they said, "Write a la Billy May."
Okay.
And I think he was pretty successful in that.
Oh yeah. Boom.
Gorgeous.
Oh, that's fabulous stuff. Yeah. Oh my. That's beautiful. So, and then his association with Quincy is fairly long. I mean, the Sinatra at the Sands, a lot of those charts are by Quincy, some by Billy May.
Well, no, he actually, Quincy impressed him somehow. He actually picked Quincy out of the horn section, and was talking to Basie about him. And Basie said, "Well, you know, not only is he a hell of a horn player, he's written quite a few great charts for me." And the next thing you know it, again, Frank putting his arm around someone, helping them get where in his mind they deserve to be. He said, "You're writing the charts for my next album." I'm sure Quincy probably fell on the floor.
That's beautiful. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of like Basie. Basie was known for using, you know, one album was Neil Hefti charts, one album was Frank Foster, one album was Benny Carter, one album was Thad Jones, and one album was Quincy Jones. And Basie said, "I'm not worried about it because they write what they want, but we play it like Basie." And so a lot of those, and again, on the list of arrangers behind Frank would make it sound like Sinatra, regardless of who was arranging, although he appreciated the different flavors behind it. That's, as an arranger myself, that's one thing that separates Frank, is that the arrangers that he chose, everything was top of the line. Not just his tux and his handkerchief, but the arrangers, the musicians, everything.
Yeah, and he also had a habit that he, after the guys had rehearsed charts, especially in a recording session, he would do at least a partial scratch vocal, and he said that he did that so the guys could hear the placement of where the vocal was going to be, and he said it'll help them play what they're going to play, so they're not just playing, as they used to say, they're not just playing the ink.
Right. Yeah.
So that it's not stiff. They knew how to, you know, get around. Like Nelson used to say, and Bill Miller said the same thing. The trick of working with Frank is we are every place he's not, and vice versa.
Right.
We don't get in each way.
That brings up a reference somebody made about Miles Davis and Duke Ellington, is that these guys brought out the best in people because possibly, along with Frank too, these guys were the best listeners. You know, they knew how to listen, they knew when to leave space, they knew how to listen to the band and respond. It's really just a music lesson. What other comment?
Well,
go ahead, Tony.
Frank, again, from the old Blue Eyes album, Frank decided after being on the road that he wanted to go back in and record "Send in the Clowns," just voice and piano with Bill Miller.
Right.
again, to give you an idea, there's a lyric, one who keeps tearing around, one who can't move. And Bill was playing behind Frank, and when he laid out the chord for one who can't move, he didn't play beyond that, and he took his hands off the keys, and there was a moment of silence. So it's like they were in unison that much. They would think alike that much.
Little telepathy. That's beautiful stuff.
Yeah, right.
It also just one other word about Frank's appreciation of other musicians. The record he made with Ellington's band, Duke Ellington's band, EKE meets F.
Yeah, Francis A. and Edward K.
Right, exactly. So, and I remember the liner notes of that include Frank being stunned by a Johnny Hodges solo. Maybe it's on Indian Summer, I'm not sure. And Frank just looked over at Johnny and said something like, "You've got to be kidding me," or something like that. But again, Hodges was mostly an instinctual musician. You know, just like he just played beautifully, and Frank appreciated that. And it's just nice to know they're in the same room together. You know?
Really.
We have 9 minutes left. Must be a few other questions out there.
Yeah, there are a few here. Alice she said she does not have a question, but she wants you to know that she totally loved the book, couldn't put it down, and she loved that era. So
tell Alice that I'm extremely flattered and honored, and I appreciate that very much. I'm glad she enjoyed it.
I'm sure she's still listening, so she just heard you say that. And next question, how close was Frank to the other guys in the Rat Pack?
They were like brothers, and right up until both Dean and Sam passed away, they remained very close, despite some of the rumors that after Dean left the Together Again tour that they didn't talk. That there's absolutely no truth to that whatsoever. Part of the reason for doing the Together Again tour was that they were trying to get Dean back in circulation because he got severely depressed after his son was killed in that airplane crash. And they remained very, very close. We would go out to dinner occasionally in Beverly Hills at a restaurant called Da Vinci. Dean and his manager, Mort Viner, and I would accompany. This was after Jilly passed away now. I would accompany Frank. And with Sam, same thing. He was extremely close with Sammy Davis Jr. Extremely close. As a matter of fact, the television special that George Slaughter produced, heralding the 60th anniversary of Sammy in show business, it was shot, if memory serves, in March. They knew Sammy was terminal. It was shot in March, and Sammy died in May. And Frank insisted on being the first performer up. And he literally looked over at Sam and he said, "What can I say? You're my brother." So they were very, very close. And all the Rat Pack stuff, I didn't witness it in its heyday, but the way I like to say it, they were having a ball on stage and they were just letting the audience in on it.
Okay, there's another question. Did Frank like performing in Cleveland? The Plain Dealer has written articles about places he liked to go when in town and people that knew him in the clubs and hotels.
Yeah, he enjoyed Cleveland. We had a running joke about Cincinnati as well. But that I'm not even going to get into. But no, he enjoyed Cleveland. He enjoyed touring wherever. I mean, the reception that he got didn't exactly hurt. People went out of their way to make sure he knew he was very, very welcome, and he appreciated that.
Frank opened the Coliseum back in 1974, which was a major venue where the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball team played for about 30 years or so, and so good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
there's another question here. Besides the Nelson Riddle Orchestra, what other bands did he really think, Frank, that is, really think were top notch?
I would say that if I had to pick one, a touring band, he thoroughly enjoyed working with Basie.
Sure.
Really enjoyed working with Basie. Yeah. Because with Nelson, a lot of the musicians in Nelson's band were the studio guys that did the albums. And same thing with Don Costa. It's not like Don Costa had his own orchestra. It would be the same guys, most of them studio guys, either from New York, some from Las Vegas, and some from Los Angeles. But Basie had his own guys that toured with him, same guys day in and day out. And so I would expect that probably his top favorite would have been Count Basie, in my opinion.
You know, that's interesting, Tony, because the main event, I think the band for that was the Woody Herman band. Is that correct?
Woody Herman. Yes, it was the Woody Herman.
I love Woody Herman. I venerate Woody Herman. But for something like that,
Thundering Herd.
Thundering Herd. Maybe Basie was off in L.A. or at the time or something. There must have been some sort of logistical thing. I'm sure Frank would have, wanted to be somewhere especially comfortable or something. But
yeah.
So
yeah, and I'll tell you another quick aside with regard, being that you brought that up. Getting to know Bill as well as I did, obviously sharing a house with him. About 4 tunes. Now, this thing was as live as you could get. Obviously, there was a 15-second or so delay. But about 4 tunes into the show, Bill's headphones went out. And that's how he was in communications with the director, telling him, okay, we're counting down, coming out of commercial. And it was quite a feat that they pulled it off, believe me.
We have one more question, and then I think our time will be about up. And actually, this is 2 questions, but we can dovetail them together. Was Frank good friends with Don Rickles? And what's the funniest story involving Frank Sinatra and Don Rickles?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that brings me back to the top of the show. Just to clarify something with regard to Frank, I was his road manager, not personal manager. I was his road manager for a small period of time after Jilly died. And then about 3 years after that, Frank retired. With Rickles, I met Rickles in 1980 when we were both performers. I was working in the State Line Cabaret at Lake Tahoe. He was working in the big room. That's when we met in 1980. We became friends. At any rate, I was his road manager and then actually did become Don's full-time personal manager. But to answer your question, there is a story in the book, excuse me, that I told, where he had invited Don to join him and the guys in the steam room at the Sands, where they would sweat out the booze from the night before so that they could give a good performance. And Don was so nervous hanging around with those guys, even though he had known them for a couple of years, but being in the thick of all of them, he was nervous and he just wouldn't stop cracking jokes. And it was getting to the point where Frank said, my stomach was hurting from laughing so hard. Don, will you knock it off? Please knock it off. Well, he just wouldn't stop. So Frank, he tore Don's towel off and he pushed him out the door of the steam room. And here is Don standing outside, completely naked, by the swimming pool that all the hotel guests were there, and he's standing there and he's covering as much as he could, and he's knocking on the door, begging Frank to let him back into the steam room. And that was a practical joke that they pulled. But Don had a unique way with Frank. If we have time, I'll tell you one quick story. Something happened in Chicago. We sat down in a restaurant at the Ambassador East, the Pump Room, and Frank had ordered some food, and they brought him a bottle of ketchup, and Don was sitting opposite him with his wife, and I'm sitting on the same side against the wall with Frank and Barbara and some other people. And Frank was trying to get the ketchup to come out of this bottle, this brand new bottle, and he's banging on the bottle and nothing's happening. Now he's banging the bottle on the table and nothing is happening. And I said, Frank, if you take your steak knife and say, he says, no, I got this. Well, he was making so much noise, people thought that he was getting aggravated, and they're looking down the table, and he recognized he was the center of attention. So quite casually, he took the bottle of ketchup and he throws it over his shoulder, and it hits the wall behind us. It smashes, and the ketchup is running down the wall. And people at the table are thinking, "Oh no, he's mad. Oh my God. Oh no, he's mad." And I kicked Don under the table, and I pointed to Frank. And Don says, "Frank, yeah, Don, could you pass the ketchup?" That's the way they were.
If you love YouTube, you can find Frank and Rickles on the Johnny Carson Show, 1976 or so. It's a great 10 minutes or so they're together, and it's priceless. So
yeah,
it's great.
Yep.
That's great. Well, I'm afraid our time is up, and I hate to cut this off because it's been a really interesting conversation, and I know everyone's enjoying it. But I do want to make sure that everyone knows that this is the book you're looking for, Sinatra and Me in the Wee Small Hours. It's a great book. And I know that especially if you're a Sinatra fan, you're going to really enjoy it. I want to thank Paul Ferguson for being with us tonight. And of course, especially Tony Oppedisano. Thank you so much. And best of luck with your book.
Thank you very much. It was an honor, and thank you for asking me.
Tony, pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much.
It was our
The
pleasure.
pleasure was mine.
Part of history.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate being part of history with you. So that's great.
Well, good night, everyone.
Thank you.